Good morning. It's a privilege to be able to stand before you this morning. I asked my mother Friday if she was going to get out this Lord's Day. I said, they're going to have a good preacher for a change. No, that's not what I said. I said, we're going to have good preaching. Oh, you ought to see the look she's given me. I had hoped it had been Gary Henry that was speaking in front of you. He was scheduled and he has limitations that he's aware of, and it's unfortunate, but he asked that we reschedule him another time. So you're stuck with me. It is a beautiful morning. It is a cold morning. I think about as a child, I would play in the snow until my bare hands had grown so cold that I couldn't pack a snowball anymore. And I couldn't feel below my knees. And evidently I have put away childish things because I cannot think of anything more torturous than being in the snow by my own choosing. I do not like the cold weather. I do not like getting wet and being cold. Let's get all that crotchety old man stuff out of the way and say, enjoy the sunshine. Chuck goes, it's not so bad. So I guess Chuck has a youthful spirit, and I do not. But it is good to be together. I appreciate the reading this morning. Brace read for us from Galatians 5. We're going to look at things about a very serious topic, a very important topic. And I found this outline. It's dated 2014. When I go through the outline, I think it's mine. But I may have stolen it from one of you. I don't know for sure. It looks like the kind of thing I would put together, but it's not in my hand. It's printed out. So I kind of am taking credit for it, but if I need to give credit elsewhere, I will do it. So if you hear this and go, well, I'm the one that wrote that, you can let me know. But I want to talk about conflict resolution this morning. Bind and devour one another. Why would we as human beings look upon one another as prey, as someone to be devoured? Why would we do that? Why would we do that as Christians? But the warning in Galatians 5 is to the church. You bite and devour one another. Why would we be in such conflict? We're going to have differences of opinion, absolutely. We should have differences of opinion, but so what? A difference of opinion is a difference of opinion. But choosing to become aggressive toward another person or defensive or looking for ways to undermine the credibility of someone that you disagree with because we have opinions, that's rude. But it's also ungodly. When we talk about conflict resolution as a subject matter, the first thing I think of is a large wooden table in a paneled room, and you have politicians and generals and leaders sitting on one side of a table and politicians on another. And those generals and those politicians, they'll negotiate. We're looking for ways to settle our differences on borders, on trade, on a host of subjects of how we coexist as nations. And we're looking for ways to do that don't involve bombs. There was a movie from the early 60s, I think it was, How I Learned to Love the Bomb, and it was a satire on sort of American politics of the time that we're almost acting as if though now that we have nuclear weapons, we're going to bring peace to the world with these nuclear weapons. And that hasn't happened. I hope you've recognized that. But there was some time that we thought if you have the ultimate power, if you've got ultimate force, that you can make people do the thing, that's going to bring peace to the world. It hasn't happened. How do we bring peace to the world? If you want to deal with conflict resolution on its very basic level, the first thing you need to insist upon is stop being the source of the conflict. Why am I the source of a conflict? When I think my opinions are better than your opinions. 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 23 says, all things are lawful, but not all things are profitable. I can draw a couple conclusions from that thought. 1 Corinthians 10:23. When I recognize that all things are lawful, I have to keep this in the context of what this passage is talking about. There are some judgments here in how we conduct ourselves. All things are lawful, but not all things build up. Verse 24, let no one seek his own good, but the good of his neighbor. If my opinions are so valuable that I'm willing to be in conflict with you over my opinions, over my judgments, what I'm really saying is that I think doing what I want is more important than doing what's in your best interest. I believe that the things that are good for me, that are not so good for you, are more important that I follow through with what is good for me. This passage is dealing in some context with matters of liberty. And I can be a source of conflict by insisting that my liberties be exercised. You know what a liberty is. I have freedom. That I exercise my freedom to do certain things or believe certain things. And I'm going to do them even though it challenges your own opinions and judgments on certain matters. But I do it in such a way as to impose myself upon you. To attempt to rework your mind so that it's more consistent and more in line with my judgment. And that's not necessarily a good thing. Verse 33 says, just as I try to please everyone in everything I do, not seeking my own advantage, but that of the many, that they may be saved. Jeff and I were having a conversation the other day, and I was reflecting on matters of judgment on my part, where I would be in disagreement with Allison. And she would say, you don't think I'm very smart, do you? And that used to really hurt me. Because I always knew that wasn't the case. But I would forge ahead with my own opinion sometimes, even when I knew that it made her feel that she was less valuable to me. How could I be so stubborn? How could I be so inconsiderate as to push my opinion over hers when either judgment could have worked? But I would be insistent, and I would do what I wanted to do. And I even answered to her before, no, I don't think you're not. I don't believe that at all. I know you're very intelligent. I just want to do it this way because it's what I want. How inconsiderate. So if you're going to have conflict resolution, stop being the source of conflict is the easy first step. I can also conclude from verse 23, however, that some opinions are better than others. Because the verse tells me not all things are helpful. All things are lawful, but not all things build up. So there are some opinions. Now, if I think the judgment's better because it's my judgment, that's the poor standard. That's the wrong standard by which to make a determination. Whether it's your husband and wife, whether it's the workplace, whether it's the family of God, when there are opinions that differ, and it's going to happen, the problem with me is that my opinions are always right, and your opinions, when they disagree with me, are wrong. And that's not the standard. Some judgments are helpful, some judgments are not. Some judgments edify, I think some translations say. Some do not. Some build up. Conversely, I would say some judgments tear down. The things that I hold dearly, the things that I believe, that doesn't add value to the judgment just because it's my judgment. So that takes discernment. That takes wisdom. And that takes humility in order to resolve a conflict when you don't see it the way I see it and I don't see it the way you see it. It leaves us at a juncture where we have to make some decisions. We can decide that neither opinion is meritorious because there's disagreement, because there's lack of consensus. That can be okay in some circumstances. I know Addie and Andrew like to go and have breakfast together at a place, and they'll get coffee, or we're going to go to Luca B's, we're going to go here, where we're going to go for breakfast. And if you came to an impasse one morning and said, but I'm just heart set, we're going to go there and not the other place. Well, if we can't agree, we just won't eat anywhere. Well, they could make breakfast and stay at home, I suppose. Or they could skip and not eat. But if that is your solution every time, eventually someone starves to death. Because eating is a function of daily living. If I conclude that when James and I don't agree on a matter of opinion, well, it's just better not to make a decision. Because I don't want to hurt James' feelings, and he's respectful of me, and he doesn't want to hurt my feelings. But there's got to be some judgment there. If every time we have a difference of opinion that it paralyzes us from moving forward, when there are things that are helpful, when there are things that are edifying, then we stagnate. And I would also argue our relationship has stagnated as well. If James and I don't have respect for one another, to reason something out, be able to give and say, well, how about we try it your way this time and we'll try it my way next time and we'll see how that works. Well, that's a reasonable solution, isn't it? Or I could just be the bigger man and say, fine, we'll wear pink ties on my head. I don't care. Whatever it is. At least it's not an IU tie, so I appreciate that much. It's pink. That's not IU. It's IU on the inside. See? There he goes pulling a fast one. But do you see the point of judgments and differences of opinion? It is not going to work in our relationship if every time we have a difference of opinion, that freezes activity. That stops all forward momentum. Because there are judgments that are profitable. Matthew 5 and verse 23 begins, so if you're offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift, therefore, before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser, while you are going with him to court, lest your accuser hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you be put in prison. Truly, I say to you, you'll never get out until you have paid the last penny. I think it's kind of interesting. I just noticed as I read this about, when you have something against, or when a brother has something against you, leave your gift at the altar and go and make reconciliation first. So I read that as, why put that in that order? I thought sacrifice was what God was expecting of me. I believe Jesus is trying to say here in the Beatitudes, this is one of those really big sermons, right? This is kind of the biggie of the whole Bible, right? Sermon on the Mount. I believe that Jesus is trying to say, what frame of mind would you be in your gift to God, in adoration of the Lord, if you recognize that there's a brother who has something against you? It could be that you're the problem. Jesus didn't identify who's in the wrong here, did he? What he did identify, though, is whose responsibility it is to make their heart receptive to the will of God. And he said, if you're aware of it, if you know about it. Now, that opens up a whole nother can of worms, doesn't it? Because sometimes I concluded you have something against me, and I go to you and talk, and you say, we don't have any problem. We get along fine. I don't understand what you're saying. Well, Greg, I don't have anything against you. What do you think this problem is? I'm glad we got this worked out. Whew. I had a false judgment of my brother, that they had something against me. Scott's got that big beard. I can't tell if he's making faces at me right now or not. But if I think he is, and I go to Scott and he said, no, I had something in my teeth, so I was doing this. Look at how I jumped to a conclusion about the status of our relationship. And it was so easy to resolve. And Jesus said about it, clear your mind of these things, take care of those personal relationships, take care of that perceived conflict so that you can be of a good frame of mind in your service to God. But look at what we don't read very often. Verses 25 and 26. When come to terms with your accuser while you're going with him. How often do we look at this? Lest your accuser hand you over to the judge, and the judge of the guard, and you be put in prison. Why do we rarely read or even study this most renowned sermon? Consequences can be dire. If I've made a false judgment, consequences can be dire. But why would I want to put my fate in the hands of another man, not in the middle of whatever this issue is, when I could resolve it directly? I mean, the judge might rule in my favor, but the judge might not. And you're going to stay in prison until you pay every penny that you owe. Jesus is saying, why would you leave that up to chance? Why would you leave that up to the judgment of a person who's not even in the middle of the situation? When you have all the tools you need to work this out yourself. And if you can get this problem worked out on the way to court, well, you're going to avoid having to pay your lawyer. You won't have any court costs, but you might lose. The consequence of unresolved conflict can be severe. And Jesus tells, it's better to work it out than take a chance at rotting in prison until you pay what you owe. Whatever the conflict is, whatever the judgment is. You could win the case, or you could have the perfect evidence and lose the case because of the bias of those who are judging you. Why would you risk that? Why would you want to do that? Jesus says that the consequences can be dire. He might not even be talking about physical consequences. I can't say this from the context, but I have already pointed out to you that when I have walls or barriers between myself and my brother, there are going to be dire consequences, regardless of who's right or wrong. Because I need to be able to love my brother. Jesus might be talking about consequences such as this breach in the relationship is more costly, is more of a prison sentence in terms of resentment, in terms of having lost a friend, in terms of loneliness, because you can't work out your differences with other people. You do that enough times and people stop wanting to be your friend. Jesus may be very subtly here, and he probably is. What's a prison term to Jesus? But what is loneliness? What is separation from the loss of a friendship? What is a life of resentment? What is a life of bitterness to the Lord? That's being in jail until you pay every penny you owe, I would argue. Those are the consequences that are lasting, that are enduring. The quest for perfection, never willing to entertain a different point of view, can encourage problems, a delusion. I've convinced myself I'm right, and I'm always right. And I close the door to consideration of what other people believe, or can, help me see in my own life. There's one writer who said that when we look for a theater where we always receive the standing ovation, you're going to find the theater has an audience of one, and you're applauding yourself. Over time, this desire to be seen as right, never making a mistake, can lead us to separation from pushing away relationships, because the threat of, well, if I'm in a relationship with you, then we have to be able to get along. And I may not want to get along with you because of my own opinions, my own ideas. To change one's mind is to be vulnerable. But that's not the same as saying to change one's mind is to be weak. There is a vulnerability, though. There's an openness for contriteness, for humility, for being able to tell someone, I'm sorry. All of that makes us feel vulnerable. A vulnerability would be a perceived or an unperceived break in the wall, weakness in the armor, so to speak. And a vulnerability is where the enemy's going to attack. Let's come at the weak side. Let's come at his right eye's not as good, so we're going to attack towards his right so that he can't see the attack. A vulnerability means I'm concerned about protecting myself from other people. and letting those barriers down, letting that anxiety over vulnerability fall, will open us up to a broader understanding of one another and humanity in general. And it is human nature. It is just human nature. We don't want to let our guard down. Matthew chapter 18, verse 15 says, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have gained a brother. Why does this responsibility again fall on the quote-unquote injured party and not the wrongdoer? That's what Jesus said about your gift at the altar in Matthew 5, saying the same thing here. The responsibility falls on the one who perceives that there is something that's keeping the relationship from not being what it should be. Why does that fall on me? They're the one that's wrong. Why does that fall on me? Because I'm the only one that can see. The other person thinks they're right. I think I'm right. But if I perceive there is something between us, that's why I have to be the one to take the action. Because whatever they did, they think they're completely justified. They're not going to change it because they're happy with what they're doing. But the Scripture says it's a fault. And this fault could lead to, again, those same dire consequences long term for that other person. Do you love your brother or not? Do you love your brother or not? Because if they are drowning in a sea of deception and you're okay with that, I would say there's no love there for your brother. Isn't that the obvious conclusion? That's why that falls on me, because of love. Matthew 18 is teaching love. If he listens to you, you've gained your brother. Well, that's love. That's I can be compassionate and I can show care. And I can arrange myself under that other person's needs and walk them out of that deception that they've succumbed to. And that's hard love. This isn't the easy love. We have easy love. We have hard love. This is hard love. This is hard to do. If I'm sitting on my heels and I'm growing in hurt and resentment because I'm blind to my own responsibility to go and talk to this brother, maybe it's a small thing. I don't want to cause trouble. Yeah, they're opinionated. Yeah, they're wrong, but, it's just not that big a deal. Can I do that? Can I say, okay, they're at fault. Scripture says they're at fault. But the fault is they're squeezing the toothpaste tube from the middle instead of rolling up from the bottom. So I just say, I'll live with it. It irritates me, but not that big a deal. Can I do that? Or do I have to point out every fault that someone has? Yeah, I can live with that. I can. If I'm going to decide, though, and if I'm going to take responsibility for this harm or this fault, and when I say take responsibility, if I'm going to take ownership of my decision to just overlook it, not cause trouble over it, it's just not worth the issue because the fault is a minor one. The toothpaste tube is not going to send anyone to heaven or hell. And there's a lot of decisions like that, and they don't have to be as trivial as a toothpaste tube. I bought that Highlander out there. And I bought it for Allison. And I said, this is what we're going to drive. And she said, what? I've got a minivan. I like my minivan. She's had 2 minivans prior to this truck, I kept calling it, Highlander. said, yeah, but you don't have as many kids to haul around. You don't need as many seats back there. And wouldn't you know, we had a vacation where we were going to do something, and that minivan got packed to where there wasn't enough room to see out the rearview mirror. We had that thing loaded. And if we'd had a little more space, I said, yeah, but that was at that one time. The rest of the time, it was smaller and easier to drive, and it was four-wheel drive. And Allison would work out of town a lot. And I wanted her to have something more sure-footed on the road. Well, she grew to really like that truck. She really enjoyed driving it. But when I got it, and she said, that's not a minivan. I said, yeah, you'll grow to like it. And she grew to like it. She never gave me grief over buying the truck. But she didn't go out and tell her mother, I wish he hadn't bought me that stupid Highlander. I want another minivan. She didn't call up one of her kids and say, I don't know why your dad's thinking. He bought this Highlander, and I've been driving a minivan for 14 years. What is that man thinking? She didn't do that. If you choose to see the slight or the fault as insignificant, then own it. Don't go and tell other people about how wronged you've been if you will not talk to the person who has wronged you. Own it. There's lots of things we just have to learn to get along with because we have differences of opinion. We don't have to resolve everything by making sure you see it the way I see it, or me seeing it the way you see it. That doesn't have to happen. But if I'm going to live with my decision not to make reconciliation on just one matter, I'm not talking about the relationship. I'm just talking about one point of difference. If we don't see the value in pursuing getting to the same mind on whatever the question is, then own it and keep it to yourself. If you find over time that you can't do that, you could come back to that same person and say, I know this has been a year ago, but man, when you bought that Highlander, that really bothered me, and I want to talk about that. Fine. That's fine. Do that. But if you aren't going to take it to the person, then you need to own it. Same context, Matthew 18. How many times, Lord, how many times will I forgive my brother when he sins against me? Peter says in verse 21. 7? Is that enough? Jesus says, I didn't say 7. I don't say 7. I said 70 times 7. The kingdom of heaven is more important than not being able to forgive somebody. I'll say that again. The kingdom of heaven is more important than not being able to forgive somebody. Conflict resolution is about being forgiving. The 4 G's of peacemaking. Go and be reconciled. We've just been talking about that one. Glorify God. Glorify God. Is this something that is going to glorify God if I pursue it? It's not about getting my way. It's not about proving I was right. Am I going to glorify God if I pursue making peace? First John chapter 2, the 3rd G is get the log out. Get the log out of your own eye so that you may see clearly to remove the mote or the speck that is in your brother's eye. 4th G in peacemaking, gentle persuasion and rebuke. There are times when you make a deal out of it. When it glorifies God, when it's your responsibility to make sure there's a reconciliation. When you're not doing it to make yourself look big, and it's not make sure you're not the fault for this conflict. Get the beam out of your own eye first, and then be gentle. Peacemaking is everyone's responsibility. Let's read 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and beginning in verse 11. Therefore encourage one another and build one another just as you are doing. We ask you, brothers, to respect those who labor among you and who are over you in the Lord and admonish you, and to esteem them very highly in love because of their work. Be at peace among yourselves. And we urge you, brethren, admonish the idle, encourage the faint-hearted, help the weak, be patient with them all. See that no one repays anyone evil for evil, but always seeks to do good to one another and to everyone. Rejoice always. Don't we have enough on our plates? Don't we have enough to deal with without dealing with being an unencouraging brother, being one who doesn't have any regard for those who have to make tough decisions? We don't know how to work out our own relationships with one another. What's going on in Thessalonica when you get this admonition? Consider those that are working and who are overseeing you. And the four of us shepherds get together and we say, man, those two, they don't get along. And that family over there is mad at that family. And how come we keep getting in the middle of stuff that they could work out by themselves? Why are we getting pulled into this? We're trying to move things forward. We're trying to advance things. We're trying to be encouraging. We're trying to work on building the body here. What's going on in Thessalonica? Verse 4 of chapter 1. I can't find it. Here we go. We know, brothers, loved by God, that He has chosen you because our gospel came to you not only in word but in power and in the Holy Spirit and with full conviction. You know what kind of men we proved to be among you for your sake. You become imitators of us and of the Lord, for you received the word in much affliction with the joy of the Holy Spirit, so that you became an example to all the believers in Macedonia and Achaia. They received the word in much affliction. Don't we have enough trouble already without making our own? Isn't that sort of to boil it down of what Paul's saying? We're in the middle of a conflict where the enemy is not one another in this building. So why would we act like that? They're just going to have to be decisions. They're just going to have to be actions on opinions. And again, some opinions are better than others. Not because it's my opinion, but some opinions are better because they're edifying, because they're for building up. There's just going to be decisions sometimes where leadership has made that we have inspected those ideas, we've talked about them, we've prayed about them, we've taken input from one another. We've taken input from within the church. We've taken input from without the church. We've sought advice from others that have wisdom and judgment and discernment. And we make a decision. Not every decision will be warmly received. I'm sorry, I can't do that. It's the fool who thinks he can please all the people all the time. You're a fool if you think that's possible. Not every decision is going to be warmly received. But decisions are not made hastily. Leaders just have to admit it's impossible to please everyone. But if we only decide things that no one disagrees with, we are leaving a lot of good progress on the table. And there are unpleasant decisions. A person who has sinned. 1 Corinthians chapter 5 deals with just a very unpleasant circumstance. Writing about the individual who is immoral. Verse 11, but I am writing to you not to associate with anyone who bears the name of brother if he's guilty of sexual immorality or greed or is an idolater, a reviler, a drunkard, or a swindler, not even to eat with such a one. What have I to do with judging others, outsiders? Is it not those inside the church whom are to judge? God judges those outside. Purge the evil person from among you. Purge them, remove them, have them taken from your midst. Push them out. That's unpleasant. When is a person evil? When is a person evil? I have to say this person who bears the name of brother, but he's guilty of all these things. It's in verse 13, I'm admonished to purge the evil person from among you. Difficult decision. How can I be careful to not expel and destroy the faith of a person who's struggling, but they want to also do what's right? Should that person be purged? What about the influence that they have? What about the leavening? Is that to be tolerated and overlooked because of a sense of compassion? These are not easy decisions. When there is not consensus, this can belabor churches with resentment within the family. We will always try to have open communication so that everything we do is understood as a church. But it doesn't mean we're always going to agree. Leadership has a hard role sometimes. Deciding a person is evil, we kind of think that's sort of God's responsibility, not ours. But that's not what's being taught here. Earn the privilege to be trustworthy. Earn the privilege of being trustworthy. Remain approachable and genuine in all of our relationships. Love the brethren. You know, if I want to draw an analogy to one of Jesus' parables, stories, you had the 1 talent, the 2 talent, and the 5 talent people, servants. And those that were faithful in little things were then found to be accountable and faithful in much bigger things. And how I deal with my personal relationships within the church, you know, maybe that's a 1 or 2 talent activity. But if we can observe someone who has the ability to be amicable but also stand on truth, of a person who can address concerns within a relationship so that they're positive, so that the doors of communication remain open, how do we know where to pick leadership from? Take care of the 1 and 2 talent conflicts as proof of one's judgment when the 5 talent decisions come. You understand the comparison I'm making to the account? You know, just after we talked about verse 13, chapter 5, the next verse, When one of you has a grievance against another, does he dare go to law before the unrighteous instead of the saints? Or do you not know that the saints will judge the world? And if the world is to be judged by you, are you incompetent to try trivial matters? How can you be trustworthy in all your relationships if you can't try the trivial matters? The writer says. That's not the person I want to give responsibility on the big decisions, the hard things. Be able to try the trivial matters. What's trivial? Now you got to say, well, what's the hard stuff and what's the trivial stuff? Well, don't we know what's trivial? The color of James' tie is trivial. I mean, it's a pretty tie, don't get me wrong. But as a matter that would come between us, I can't imagine anything smaller. And the fact that it's an IU tie, it's still trivial. But if I can't handle these simple things of interpersonal relationship and conflict resolution, how can I be judged worthy when the hard decisions come? Be tempered and be temperate. To be even-tempered. What is even-tempered? What are we even referring to? If you think about working metal or steel, and steel gets heated and molded and shaped, and there are presses that bring thousands of tons of pressure down upon metal, and they conform it to new shapes. And then that steel will want to bounce back to its original form, but you temper it so it can be quenched in oil or water or something. Bring that temperature down, and I don't know the chemistry. It's realigning the way the atoms are locking together, whatever. But when steel is even tempered, does it shatter or does it bend? Who knows the answer to that? Do you have any steel people here? When steel is properly tempered, does it shatter or does it bend? It bends. It yields under pressure. Be even-tempered. Even-tempered means you've got to know when to yield. Properly tempered steel is important in machinery, in industry. It has strength. It has endurance, but it also yields. Proper mental control. In order to seek peace and love, it takes work and it takes concentration. I was asked recently, how is it you don't seem to get angry? And I'm thinking, well, you need to know me better than you do, for starters, because I do get angry, and that's what I said. But when I let my anger take my emotions and move me to places that aren't rational, like belittling or using an ad hominem attack and attacking the person instead of the idea. When I do those kind of things, I lose control of my ability to influence. And so I told this person, I don't always succeed, but I try to keep my anger at check so that I can exercise good mental control. I don't have enough extra brain power to think things through when I'm angry. And so I have to set that aside in order to not do something that's going to cost me dearly down the road, or do something that's going to cost me dearly. I could be in that prison for a long time. Jesus said, until every penny is paid back. We have to keep control of our emotions. We have to keep proper mental check on ourselves. 1 Corinthians 6 talks about, judging the world, these are trivial things. You need to be able to do this. It's to your shame. that you would go to law one to another? Can it be that there is no one among you who's wise enough to settle a dispute between the brothers? That's just, there's a sense of, the writer is just kind of incredulous. Why am I even talking about this? Is almost the way he's saying it. Isn't this obvious? Keep control of your emotions. You got a better chance of keeping a handle on your relationships. Why are we in conflict? You know, a lot of it is probably pride. A lot of it's probably a lack of temperance, the ability to yield, but with strength. But if I'm thinking about conflict and the desire to resolve conflicts, and I want to practice good conflict resolution, I think the key to remember is, who is my enemy? Who is my enemy? Why would I make an enemy where I don't have one? Who is my enemy? My enemy is not the person who hates God. My enemy is the prince of the air. My enemy is the one who hates God, but has the power over this world. That's my enemy. And if I confuse myself and I think that people are my enemies, then I'm going to behave in ways that mean I can't let my guard down. I can't be vulnerable in front of someone if I think that they're my enemy. And we're not enemies. If I cannot love all men, how can I say that I love God? 1 John chapter 2. You know, Andrew read at the table this morning. If I can remember that I was ransomed, that I was bought with a price, that I have been born again, and how valuable that is in the eyes of the Lord, if I can remember that and think about that and focus on that, then I can also recall and focus and reflect on how valuable you are, because you also have been redeemed. You have been reconciled. You have been ransomed. And that makes you valuable. That makes you worth something. As God's people, we shine when we understand how to resolve conflict. You know, I think part of what Paul was saying in talking about the circumstance where one would go to trial as opposed to settling their differences between brothers, he said it's to your shame. Is he not even saying it's to your shame that even the world would be ashamed by that? Even outsiders would look at that and say, why would I want to associate myself with these people when they can't even take care of their own problems within themselves? What is our opportunity to influence the world if we can't get along with one another? Conflict resolution, as I said, these are not easy things. This is hard love. But let's practice hard love. The easy love doesn't need practice. It comes easy. Let's practice hard love. If you have any needs this morning that you want to share with the group, if you have something to where you're concerned about how a brother thinks about you, I think I made it pretty clear what your responsibility is this morning. That doesn't mean you have to come tell us about it. In fact, the instruction I see is go tell the brother first. So if you're sitting here thinking, I've got work to do, don't come tell me. Do it. But if there is something we can help you with this morning, we would love to be able to help you, pray with you. If you need further bolstering or instruction or strength or encouragement to do the right thing, we can do that publicly. We can do that privately. Please let us know if we can help you as we stand and sing.